Coming up on Theatre Talk.
Somebody said about Les Liaisons Dangereuses, if you read this book, you know the society can't go on like this.
Exactly, exactly.
It's heading towards the edge of a cliff.
Theatre Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation.
Tonight I am going to tell you a story which is real. But what do we mean by that? All stories are real.
October 20th, 1969.
From New York City, this is Theatre Talk. I'm Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post. Now, Susan, there is a terrific, I don't know what, if I call it a play, I guess you call it a great theatrical experience on Broadway now. The Encounter at the Golden Theater. It's conceived, starring, brilliantly put together by one of the theater's great geniuses, Simon McBurney, who joins us on Theatre Talk. We've been fans of yours for many years, and it's the first time we've met.
Well, thank you for having me.
What would you call it?
Yeah, what would you call your piece?
I would call it a play, but I would also call it a story, because it uses perhaps the oldest form of theatre, which is very simply telling a story. But it does it in a way which I think is probably completely unexpected.
So it's a combination of a play, but also a radio show, a podcast. I've heard it compared to. You're taking us on this journey.
Yes, I would say that it's really not like radio, and certainly
Yes,
not
that's
like
an old form.
not like a podcast.
No.
Why should we think that it's like radio? Well, because one of the things is that the form of it is that the story begins, and I begin to relate this, the journey of this man, Loren McIntyre, who was a photographer in 1969, getting lost in the jungle. And you hear my voice telling that story for more than 25 years. And gradually, his voice starts to sort of chop into it. So what you see is a process of me becoming him, and in the end, I become him totally, but he himself begins to sort of fall apart and become unhinged in a way that you can only understand when you see the piece. And that is the story. It's almost the story of someone being taken apart, all their assumptions about the way that they live, what they think the world is like, even
what
down
time
to
is.
Yeah, even down to the point he asks himself, is our conception of time, this thing that we think of in our watches, is that real, or is that just a story that we've made up?
So what is the initial situation that's pushing him towards being unhinged?
In 1969, Loren McIntyre, photographer with National Geographic, and he's a very remarkable man, and there is a whole archive of his work in Washington, he asked National Geographic if he could prove the source, find the source of the Amazon. They said, that's not very photogenic, but we have heard about these people called the Mayoruna, who were thought to be disappeared, extinct. They're coming out of the forest. Get us photos, and then we will fund your expedition. He's dropped into the Amazon completely alone, and he makes contact. But he wants his photographs, and he gets so far in the jungle that he has no way of getting back, because he doesn't speak their language, they don't speak his. And of course, they are in a situation where they are fleeing the colonial approach, where they are fleeing oil men, rubber tappers.
The white man is a threat to them.
Huge, huge, any intruders. And so he's in a perilous situation, but also he's in a self-imposed situation. He went in, if you like, you could say, committing a crime. He wanted to take photographs. He wanted something from them for his own good. One of the things that happens is he loses his camera.
Yes.
So he loses his reason to be there. And at that point, he's just a body. He's a tourist. He has to be like those people. And as a consequence, he descends into, if you like, their way of seeing the world. He begins to see the world in a whole different manner. He gets lost. He nearly dies. Somebody tries to kill him. And then ultimately he goes through this enormous ritual which takes him to the beginning of time.
To the beginning, yeah. How did you come across this piece, and what got you thinking about turning it into this theatrical experience?
I was given the book in 1994. Several years later, I made a piece about memory called Mnemonic.
Yes, a
which was
wonderful
in,
piece.
Right.
in New York. And at that point, I became very fascinated as to what, one of the last great mysteries is this one we carry inside our heads. How we remember, how we imagine, who we actually think we are. What is this curious thing about feeling conscious? Yeah? We know when we're dead, theoretically, we're not conscious. Before we're born, we're not conscious. So this thing happens to us where suddenly I am me and you are you, and we feel that this is our world. So I made this piece about memory, and I realized that memory and identity had a very close relationship, but I continued to have discussions with neuroscientists and all sorts of people about what consciousness is, which is more complicated than memory. Memory has a particular biochemical function, but what is consciousness? I don't know. We still can't know. It just says how can you talk about consciousness when you're conscious? So I became fascinated by that, and then I started to reread this book, Amazon Beaming,
Yeah.
and I realized that there was a connection between the two things, and my own obsession and the telling of this story started to interlink. So if you like, the show is a kind of twinning of two stories. One is the story of Loren McIntyre, but the other is the story of me, Simon McBurney, uncovering this story and thinking about the notion of consciousness, and because I have a child, realizing that the way that I'm thinking about the world, this materialistic consumer world, is shaping my daughter's future. So a very simple question: what kind of world am I leaving my daughter? What way are we thinking? Is this the best possible way? Are we being as constructive as we can about this world, or are there questions that we should ask ourselves? And so just as Loren McIntyre is forced to confront the way that he sees the world, in a sense, me, the performer, I'm also confronting my own world and my responsibility to my daughter. So I should say that my daughter appears in the show.
Yes, we hear her voice.
People literally say they see her on stage, even though she's not there. And one of the strange things is that gradually through the piece, people come up to me afterwards and say, stranger, I was convinced that I saw somebody else on stage at a certain point. And this is because I use this, a binaural head, which means that you hear literally in sound all around you in 3 dimensions. So what it does, why do I use that? Why not just do a play? Why not do something a little bit like The Lion King and have a lot of sort of stuff on stage? Well,
Puppets.
because I think that the most powerful tool we have is also something inside our heads, which is our imagination. For me, growing up, yes, the radio was a much more visual medium than the television, because I could imagine things that are not there. But by actually having it on stage and by suggesting things with light, with video, with this sound, is you play a kind of magic trick on people's minds where they start to think that they see things, but with this binaural head, they are placed, you are placed, every member of the audience is placed in the center of the action. So the head is on stage, you're plugged into the head, and as I walk around it, so I am walking around you. Why do I do that? Very simply, solitude. What is it like to be totally alone, 400 miles of Amazonian jungle in every direction, just you? Now, you can sit back with your audience and go, well, that's an interesting, there's Hamlet all alone. Gosh, he's having a tough time, you say to your neighbor. But if suddenly you have the experience of solitude with your headphones and you go, oh my God, this is me. And suddenly I hear a mosquito behind me and, oh God, I don't want to hear that. You become placed in the situation of McIntyre, which is what I want.
At one point he gets, was it maggots that are crawling all over him? What is it? Some horrible...
Well, what happens, I was in the Amazon 2 years ago.
I was going to ask you if you went to do research and
I
traveled down
did.
yourself.
I was in a village with Mayoruna and I told them this story. I almost wanted permission to tell the story. I said, look, this is one point of view. If you like, it's a colonial point of view. It's a white man going into your territory. But I want to tell you this story because something happens in it. They were absolutely fascinated, and they were insistent that I should tell the story, but also tell people that they exist and what they do. But while I was there, yes, I went into the forest, and one of the things is that when you get wet, you get insects that go right into your feet, and quite quickly they install themselves in your body.
Yeah.
And they quickly lay eggs inside your body. Now, I was kind of, in terms of mosquito bites, I was okay. My sound recordist, who I went in, had more than 1,000 mosquito bites by the time he came out. I don't know why, but I was kind of okay. But it is the most biodiverse place on the planet.
Well, I just want to say you had me itching. Speaking of the power of the imagination, I
was swatting mosquitoes behind me in the
with the maggots in the toes. Then I found myself itching, and I thought, surely you're imagining this. So it's so powerful. You, the actor up there, being the guy in the Amazon, because this is not just a reading. You are doing quite a powerful and very athletic acting job.
What is important for your viewers to understand is that it becomes embodied. So if you like, the theatre piece becomes more and more and more real. So it begins with the storytelling until I'm literally, if you like, possessed. I'm dancing,
yes.
I'm covered in blood from head to foot.
You're terrified about your survival.
I am terrified about my survival. I'm confronting the idea of mortality, which is also something which disturbs us in the West very much. We go, I really don't want to die. It's the end of time, the end of my consciousness. What's going to happen?
But yet you have become part of their consciousness because you don't know if you're ever getting back.
Yeah,
to
but
normal
also
life.
What I discovered when I was really, not discovered, but what I understood from my conversations with the people that I was with in the Amazon is that for them, what is inside their head is inseparable from what's outside. So the jungle is part of their mind. What they think and feel can be seen outside them. If you destroy what's outside you, you're destroying something that's within. And that, I feel, is a very profound thought, because we are part of nature. We are part of this planet. Even as we're sitting here, we feel we're in the town, we're not out with the cows and so on. No. Despite the fact that we're here, we're still part of nature, and we cannot escape it, just as we cannot escape the planet.
But we're not in touch with it to sustain it.
Yeah, but we can't escape the planet.
No.
And we can't escape nature.
I want to ask you quickly, what has happened to the Mayoruna? Is the Mayoruna?
Mayoruna, perfect, yeah.
What has happened to them since 1969? And that, because now civilization has encroached on them.
Did they come to New York as tourists to see the encounter?
But because in this story, they're totally out of touch with they're running and they're not being encroached upon. But now what's happening with them?
They're part of a large group called the Matses in the Yavari Valley, which is their homeland. There is still an area where they reckon up to 50 uncontacted tribal peoples still.
Oh, really?
Which is a lot.
Yeah.
In 2016, people who've never encountered white people at all.
Wow.
It's a vast area still. But what is happening, of course, is that the rush for oil is just simply increasing. And until we decide that we don't need oil, which we have to decide fairly soon, because there are all sorts of other ways of getting electricity, harnessing the power in the world, then unfortunately these things will continue to happen.
All right, the play is called the theatrical experience. It's brilliant, called The Encounter at the Golden Theatre, conceived by and starring Simon McBurney. Thank you very much for being our guest on Theatre Talk.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Susan, one of my favorite plays is Les Liaisons Dangereuses. I worked on it as a young little intern in Liz McCann's office in 1987. It is coming back in a fine new production starring Liev, Schreiber, and Janet McTeer. But the man responsible for Les Liaisons Dangereuses is Christopher Hampton, who many years ago read the Laclos book, I believe.
Oh, I was a student then. That was many, many years ago.
Well, welcome to Theatre Talk.
Thank you.
When you read the book, did you immediately think, there's a play here somewhere? What was the idea?
Not at all, no. But I mean, I read the book and was staggered by it. I was about 19. And I thought, my God, this is, oh, I see, I understand. There was lots of things about sex, for example, I understood for the first time reading this book. I always described it as the best sex education a boy could hope for. And then I had this sort of notion that it might make a play. And I suggested, I remember the first time in the mid-70s when the new theatre on the National Theatre in London was opening in its new building.
Right.
And they were looking for, you know, writers to provide them with material. And I said, I'd like to adapt Les Liaisons Dangereuses. Well, it wasn't so well known in the book. There,
Yeah, could you sketch it? Because this book is from 1782.
That's right.
Can you
So
sketch in what it is for those who might not know?
yeah, it's a book about two bored, extremely rich aristocrats who have had an affair in the past, who amuse themselves by corrupting other people and then telling each other about it. And they, at the beginning of the play, embark on a particularly complicated intrigue, and it turns back on them and bites them.
And this novel came out before the French Revolution and was said that Marie Antoinette was supposed to be a fan of the novel.
Oh yes, Catherine the Great, everybody, they all read it, but it didn't do poor old Laclos, the author, very much good, because the scandal hurt his career a good deal. He was a career soldier.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
And he just got into big trouble. And you didn't get royalties in those days, you know. So this book was going like 50 Shades of Grey, you know, but it didn't do him
And he
any
didn't
good at
get it.
all.
But then, no, because I was reading these thumbnail analyses of the play, that they thought that the decadence of the story might have fueled people in their sentiments towards the upper classes when the revolution hit.
Well, I think there's actually a very interesting phenomenon, and I've never quite understood what the connection was, but the predominant popular literature in the 1770s and 1780s in France was pornographic. Mm-hmm. It was pornography, light pornography, heavy pornography, and there must be some connection between that and the fact that the revolution was right around the corner.
Mm-hmm. Well, it didn't make sense to me. The upper classes would be so jaded that that's all they had to do was be obsessed with pornography rather than and where all these.
Well, somebody
people were
said
starving.
about Les Liaisons Dangereuses, if you read this book, you know the society can't go on like this.
Exactly.
It's heading towards the edge of a cliff.
Exactly, because these two people, they're, for human beings, for them are just little things you play with on the board.
Yeah, that's right.
They're not.
That's right. On the other hand, they're extremely charming and interesting.
They're fabulous people. You want to be I want to be Alan Rickman. This has been made a star of Alan Rickman and Lindsay Duncan.
And
the
you
original
certainly
production.
have them saying very witty things
But
and
what-
insightful things.
But just go back for a second. When you went to the National Theatre,
Well, they
you
said they went off and read the book, and then they said, "Well, no, we don't want to commission this play because the two main characters never meet. They just write letters to one another in the
Yeah,
book."
that's right. Yeah.
And I said, "Well, I had it in mind to."
Trust the playwright, please.
And they said, no, listen, let's find something else for you to do. And it was about, I think it was another 8 years before the Royal Shakespeare Company offered me an open commission. And I just wrote the play and handed it in. They weren't at all pleased
Really?
when they got it. No.
What was their complaint?
They thought, what is this, this old book, and, and I don't know whether it's going to work. And it was supposed to be for the Barbican, which was relatively new then, this 1,000-seat theatre that was the RSC's London base. And they decided to demote it to a theatre called The Other Place, which was
Right.
essentially a tin hut and a car park in Stratford. And they gave it 22 performances, and nobody could have been more amazed than they, I think, when it found an audience.
What was it like when Lindsay Duncan and Alan Rickman? I mean, two great. Alan became a great star. Lindsay is a great star, but nobody knew who they were back then.
No, nobody knew who they were, and the thing was that your casting was dependent on who was in the
Company.
The company.
Right.
But at the beginning of the casting period, you could say, and I had an instinct about Alan Rickman, and I said, "Can you ask Alan Rickman to join the company and play this part?" And they said, yeah, okay, he can be in As You Like It, he can be in... So they offered him a line of parts, including this. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of responsible for shoehorning him into the RSC. And then the other people were there already.
Right.
The play took off immediately.
First performance, it was...
It was incredible. I've never really experienced anything like it before or since. And I remember going down it only had 22 performances, and I remember going down to see it in November for a matinee, and it was snowing. And I went, there's this tiny theatre in this car park, and I walked down the street and I saw a line of people waiting for return tickets coming right out of the car park and down the street.
In the snow.
And in the snow, and I thought, oh, I see, something really good is happening.
I only met Alan Rickman 3 times, but he always seemed like such a charming, genial person, and not the venal Valmont.
He was a wonderful man.
Yes.
And when he died, everybody knew he was a very kind man, but he was particularly kind to young actors. He went out of his way to help people. Everybody had a story about how he'd been kind to them.
But he had this quality when he acted, because then he
Terrifying.
Went from, yes,
Totally.
And then he went into the
Became
Die
a
Hard
villain.
movie, remember, and became a movie star. It was Die Hard.
It was Die Hard that
Yes.
he got because I think Joel Silver came to see it.
I would
And
imagine.
it's
I
really
would
like
imagine.
Yeah.
When you were pulling the book apart, what were you looking for to make it into a play? I mean, what was the key for you to take this epistolatory novel and shape it as a play?
Well, listen, the plot is great. I wanted to write a play that was like the equivalent of a page turner.
Right.
That you desperately wanted to know what happened next.
Right.
And the plot is such a marvelous clockwork mechanism. It's so satisfying. And then I had to find a sort of language for it.
Right.
And I started off, I had a couple of false starts. I started off writing a rather sort of archaic kind of 18th century. And I thought, this is going to distance.
Yeah.
Then I thought I'd write it completely modern. And that didn't quite seem right either. So eventually I found a way of, there are a lot of very complicated sentences in it. It's very hard to learn for actors. But it's all the language is modern.
Right.
So it kind of feels slightly from another era, but it's and what was very interesting about it was precisely when we did it how modern it suddenly felt. There were these people in these extraordinary costumes, wigs and so on, and they were just like us.
No, it's a tale for our times, most certainly.
It was very interesting, I remember at the time too, because AIDS was
Yes.
happening.
Yes.
And there was a lot of conversation around
Yes.
this kind of decadence
Yes.
and AIDS and these.
It's really interesting if you have a play that kind of comes back, how different the resonances are from one period to another. So in the 80s, as you say, it was AIDS. It was also the me generation. It was also the bang in the middle of Thatcher here and
Exactly.
Thatcher in England and Reagan here.
Yep.
Where people were kind of being encouraged to be selfish and Now it seems much more of a play about the 1%.
Yeah,
That's right.
very true.
About these incredible.
Back to the
there are
French
a few
Revolution.
people.
Yeah.
There are very, very few people with a massive amount of
Right.
time and money.
Time and money.
Who could do whatever they damn well please with
Exactly.
no repercussions.
Exactly.
The structure of this drama also is so compelling. As you say, it's a great plot, and also the way you put it together. And I have to say, in this play, there's one of the most devastating scenes that I've ever seen in a play. It's the end of Act 1, that when I saw it performed, it made me very uncomfortable and upset. And I read the play again yesterday, and it made me uncomfortable and upset all over again just to read that scene. Did you understand what the impact of that scene would be as you were writing it, or did that?
Yes,
come
I
up on
think
you?
so, and I think that you have to do a couple of things in this kind of story. First of all, what they do is they seduce the audience,
Yes.
right? Those two characters, and you think, my God, these people are really glamorous and
Right.
intelligent and witty. But then then they start doing things that are really uncomfortable
And brutal, yeah.
and brutal, and so you on a good night you feel the audience sort of shifting during that scene.
It always reminded me a bit of All About Eve with the verbal felicity, the way the George Sanders character can make Eve Harrington submit.
Well, it's very funny you should ask me that, because I have actually done a
You've done an
stage
adaptation.
version
Right, I forgot about that.
of
yes.
All About Eve, but I think you might not be seeing it because
Why?
because I think what's been decided is that Ivo van Hove is going to do his own version of it.
Of all, is he going
All About Eve.
Are you-
not your script?
Not
He's
my,
going to.
not my script. no.
Seriously.
But you would have been
Yeah.
perfect for that, because I do remember thinking, George.
I have great admiration for Ivo van Hove. He's not famous for his sense of humour. But
No.
in fact, when I did the adaptation first, it was 3 or 4 years ago. It didn't happen because there were then legal problems came out of the woodwork about the rights and so on. So the whole
All
thing-
about Eve.
All about Eve. So the
Oh, I
whole
would
thing
think,
went
yeah.
into suspension for
Yeah.
for a minute.
Right.
But in the meantime, we'd had this reading, and Alan Rickman did.
He played George. Oh my
He did Addison DeWitt, and Kristen Scott Thomas played Margot Channing, and Felicity Jones played Eve, and it was the most magical afternoon. And the way I'd adapted it was I kind of made I make him the narrator, so he recruits the audience on his side. It's pretty much the same trick, actually. He recruits the audience on his side, and then you realize what a terrible man he is.
Those are the best parts, though, I think.
But not as terrible as Valmont.
Oh, not as terrible as Vedmont.
All right.
I think this is a perfect part for Liev Schreiber. I think he has that ability
Yes.
to charm you and then terrify you.
I'm really impressed with him.
All right, Les Liaisons Dangereuses is going to be at the Booth Theater, starring Liev Schreiber and Janet McTeer. Terrific play, adapted. Really written by. We can say
Written by, yeah.
Written. You always get adaption credits, and I think that adaption is a nice word for saying Chris take somebody else's thing and totally rewrote it.
Yes.
Okay.
But we'll give a little credit to, what's his name again?
Laclos.
Yes, thank you.
Laclos.
Poor fellow.
That's right. No royalties, all yours. Christopher Hampton, thanks for being our guest tonight on Theater Talk. Good luck with Les Liaisons Dangereuses.
Thank you very much.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the CORY and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, the Noel Coward Foundation, Carrie J. FREEZE, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you